Hello, my name is Robbie Ward. I'm the Daily Journal's local government and politics reporter, and we're discussing open records in government, particularly electronic and digital records. And today we have an expert in open records, particularly related to electronic form. We have Oklahoma State University Associate Professor Joey Senat, who teaches media law, but he has research on digital public records. And Dr. Senat, I certainly appreciate you participating today.
Thank you.
Well, and the issue of public records and public documents has long been an issue between people who advocate for open government and a lot of public officials who say that certain information should be public, even if it doesn't fall within the exemptions allowed in state law. And the use of different mediums to communicate, such as electronic documents, has created, in a sense, a new chapter in open government. And you recently published an article related to using personal devices to transmit electronic records. And do you mind telling us a little bit about what led to your research?
Well, it actually, the idea started here at Oklahoma State. A student in my public affairs reporting class came back from a regents meeting and had noted that the regents were giving pay raises to certain employees to cover the cost of the employees' personal cell phones, smartphones. People who were on call 24 hours a day, like the university spokesperson, but rather than give that person a government-owned phone, they were going to give them some extra money to help pay for their phone contract. And so I wondered, well, what about the public record status of all the information created, being sent, received on those personal phones? Started doing some research on it. Our university president, who's an attorney, disagreed and said, no, I believe all the work I do on my BlackBerry that's for the university would still be private because I own the BlackBerry. So I eventually had a state agency ask an attorney general question for us, and in our state, attorney general opinions are binding. So it spoke to the attorney general, wrote up the question, and the attorney general agreed that if it's related to the transaction of public business, expenditure of public funds, administering public property, the content is the key to whether it's a public record. So if it involves one of those three things, it doesn't matter on whose computer it is. If the public official is sending it from a personal laptop or their own cell phone, it's still a public record if it deals with public business.
Well, and the issue of public documents on personal devices, that's something that has been an issue here in Tupelo with local government. The mayor of Tupelo uses his personal phone to send emails and text messages, and I made a open records request for his text messages sent and received through that device related to his capacity as an elected official, and certainly the city turned down the request, saying that they did not maintain or have possession of the documents. Also, that since this was a personal device, they didn't believe that the records law applied. And in April, the Mississippi Ethics Commission ruled that the text messages are public documents, but at the time, the State Ethics Commission did not have enforcement power, although that has changed as of July 1st of this year. So now the Ethics Commission can issue subpoenas and hold hearings and levy fines. But the whole idea of communicating through text messages and emails, do you, certainly this is the more modern way of communication. A lot of people think of that as replacing written letters. Why is it important for the public to have an opportunity to have access to what these public officials communicate?
Well, the mayor, the attitude your mayor you described for your mayor, wanting to use a personal cell phone or an email account or text messages. Our Attorney General noted in his Attorney General opinion that this is increasingly the case, and that you see it across the country where public officials are using their personal email accounts or cell phones to conduct their business, which is the public's business. The courts and the attorneys general across the country have not agreed with one of the premises you said. The Tupelo city officials were saying that, well, we don't have access to it because it's not on a government-owned computer, and that argument's been rejected by the courts and, as I said, the AGs across the country, because if it's being sent or received, maintained, if it's part of the public official's job, then it's still a public record, whether it's in the hands of the city or not. I mean, it just becomes it undermines the principle of open government if you can allow government officials to use their own electronic devices to conduct their business and avoid public scrutiny. There's no limit on that principle that ownership would be the key. A mayor could walk in every day to City Hall, bring in a personal laptop, sit there and do his or her work all day long on that personal laptop, and at the end of the day, their argument would be that it's private. And as I said, courts and AGs just aren't accepting that, because it would just undermine, it would just destroy the concept of open government. And the public should know it. Government does belong to the public, contrary to what some public officials seem to think at times. And we not only have a right to know what they're doing and why decisions are made, but we have an obligation to know. It's how we participate in our government.
Well, and just the idea of text messages and emails, a lot of people see these things as very personal, and why do you think that the public should have the ability to view these communication documents of these people, even if they are public officials?
Well, that is the key, though, and it's because it can often explain how they made decisions, why, what influences there were, what decisions were actually made. We're not always talking about a public body that would have to vote, you would think, in a public meeting, but a lot of other bureaucrats and elected officials who make decisions and influence how government operates. That's still our government, and they may think it's personal, but it's not. It belongs to the rest of us.
And I know with your research about personal devices used to communicate public information, from your research, how are states throughout the country in terms of stating that these documents are indeed public record, even if communicated through a private device?
Well, the state legislatures are sort of behind on this. I think Texas recently, a year or so ago, did pass legislation pointing out that these were going to be public records regardless of where they were maintained or kept. It's the courts and the AGs that have been actually answering the question, because people have been seeking access to these documents. They start to realize that public officials are using not their office email, not their government email as an example, but their private email accounts, using their private cell phones to text each other. And when those questions come up, the the decision by the courts and the AGs have been that this is a public record if it deals typically with transaction of public business, expenditure of public funds, administering public property. If it's part of their official duties, it still belongs to the public. It's not private.
Well, but one of the issues that a lot of local and state government officials say is that the law may say that these documents are public, but there's a cost element that almost makes it prohibitive to archive and retain these documents, not just on personal devices, but also on devices that are paid for by the taxpayers. What thoughts do you have on governments saying that the process itself of archiving and retaining these public documents are too onerous to actually to do?
Well, you know, I disagree with that, and it's less expensive to archive digital information than it is paper documents. They take up less space. It costs less to copy them, to make copies you keep in storage and provide to the public. And this concept's not new. The idea that if it's public content, that it's still public records, regardless of where it's at, that's an old concept. When I was a reporter at the Commercial Appeal in Memphis, was involved in an open records lawsuit where records of city-owned property were in the hands of a private nonprofit, and the state court said, no, it's still public because it's a public record. It doesn't matter in whose hands it is. And you know, otherwise that's a way for government to try to get around open government laws by putting the records in the hands of somebody who might be their attorney or in the hands of some private nonprofit, and that hasn't been accepted by courts. And the idea that it costs more to archive electronic records sort of ignores the fact that it's less expensive than it is to make paper copies, and certainly less bulk space required to keep electronic documents. And that's only going to go, the cost is only going to go down, and the storage is only going to go down.
And I'm just curious, because in Mississippi, the State Department of Archives and History has a retention record schedule for all public documents required for cities, counties, states to keep. But actually there's no enforcement power for these governments to comply with the law. In Oklahoma, does a penalty exist for governments who choose not to comply with the law?
Well, we have, separate from the Open Records Act in this state, we have a separate statute that deals with records retention, and that statute actually lays it out for state agencies, state government, and then it says that local governments, cities and counties, should create a retention schedule, and that is often overlooked. You know, we deal with cities, small towns, and some of the counties in the state, and they don't have retention records, so they don't really keep records, and it becomes an issue. There's not really an enforcement mechanism here either for it. There's no penalty for those officials as there would be if they were violating the Open Records Act itself by not providing access to a record that they have. Yeah, that's a misdemeanor in our state. They can go to jail and they can be fined.
Right. And well, in Mississippi, there's also a misdemeanor offense of destroying public records without authorization. But I'm not aware, and one of the officials I spoke with the Mississippi Department of Archives and History is not aware of this statute literally ever being prosecuted. And certainly with your research into electronic documents, emails, text messages, there's always, it seems, a new technology that emerges that allows us to communicate in a new way. And it also seems like governments often are a few steps behind the technology in terms of requiring the archiving and retaining of this information. In terms of providing the best transparency and access to government decision making, what should do you have any suggestions or solutions on what can make government as transparent as possible?
Well, you can write the strongest Open Records Act. You can have enforcement, but the bottom line is it's up to voters to elect people who have integrity and who believe in government transparency. One of the things I hear from people when I do local discussions is, well, how do I know that they're sending all their text messages, or that when I ask for those records, and the city, for example, might say to the mayor, okay, or the city council or a school board, provide all the documents from your email account that are dealing with this government issue. How do we know they actually sent them? And I say, you don't know. You know, what it comes down to is that you need to elect people who have integrity, who actually are honest, and who believe in open government. This constant cat and mouse game between public officials, some public officials trying to avoid the law and always trying to find a loophole, we the voters are the ones who can put an end to that by kicking the bums out of office and putting in some people who actually believe in it.
Well, Dr. Senat, actually I can't think of a better way to end our discussion than the point you just made. And again, I really want to thank you for spending a few minutes discussing open records and all their forms with me, and certainly I look forward to other research in this area.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to the readership of your newspaper, and this is an interesting topic, and it's important to the public.
Great. Thanks a lot.